At 72, my life was a comforting rhythm of flour and yeast. Then, a betrayal sharper than any knife threatened to crumble everything. My own son's deception stole my savings, my peace, and almost my very identity. He expected quiet defeat, but he forgot. A baker knows how to rise from the ashes. The scent of flour is the ghost I've lived with my entire life. At 72, it's a phantom limb, a comforting presence that clings to my cardigans and settles in the lines around my eyes. For 40 years, my husband, Arthur, and I ran Graham's Grains. He was the face of it, the booming laugh, the warm handshake, the man who knew every customer's name. I was the heart and the hands, the one who understood the soul of a sourdough starter and could coax perfection from a finicky oven at 4 a.m. Arthur has been gone for 5 years now, and the silence in our little house is a physical weight. The bakery is still there, a landmark on a quiet corner of our town, managed by a capable young woman named Chloe. I'm officially retired, but a part of me never left. I go in twice a week, not to work, but to breathe. I run my fingers over the worn wooden counter, inhale the symphony of yeast and caramelizing sugar, and feel the echo of a life well lived. It's my sanctuary, the last tangible piece of my history with Arthur. My son, Barnaby, sees it differently. At 45, he's all sharp suits and a gleaming, predatory smile that never quite reaches his eyes. He's a real estate investor, a profession that has always sounded both impressive and terrifyingly abstract to me. He visits on Sundays, ostensibly to check on his old mom, but his gaze always sweeps over my home, my life, with a subtle air of appraisal, as if calculating its depreciation. "This old place, Mom," he said last week, gesturing vaguely at the bakery as we drove past. "It's got character, I guess, but it's a relic. You can't build a future on nostalgia." He then launched into his favorite topic, Oakwood Terrace. It was his grand vision, a sprawling development of luxury condos and retail spaces on the edge of town. He spoke of it with a feverish intensity, his words painting pictures of glass, steel, and effortless modern living. I would nod along, a part of me swelling with pride at his ambition, another smaller part shrinking from the cold, hard gloss of it all. He was building a new world, and I was just a keeper of an old one. The formal pitch came on a day when the sky was the color of a bruised plum, threatening a storm that never broke. Barnaby arrived not with his usual casual air, but with a heavy leather briefcase. He sat me down at my own dining table, the one Arthur had sanded and refinished himself, and spread his vision across its surface. It was a brochure for Oakwood Terrace, glossy and heavy in my hands. The pages were filled with architectural renderings of smiling, impossibly attractive people strolling through sun-drenched courtyards. It was a world away from the warm, flour-dusted reality of Graham's Grains. He pointed to a prime corner spot in the main plaza rendering. "Right there, Mom. That's for us." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, earnest tone. "This isn't about me asking for a handout. This is a family investment plan. It's for the Graham legacy." He tapped the picture again. "We're going to open a new Graham's Grains there, state-of-the-art, sleek. It's what Dad always talked about, remember? Taking our craft to the next level, not just being the neighborhood's best-kept secret." My breath caught in my throat. He was right. Arthur had dreamed of expansion, of a second location, but we never had the capital or the nerve. Barnaby was weaving my husband's ghost into his sales pitch, and he was doing it brilliantly. "I've structured it all," he continued, flipping to a page of intimidating charts and figures. "You invest your retirement fund, and I'll make you an honorary director. You'll get a guaranteed 20% annual return. Your money isn't just sitting in a low-yield account. It's working for the family. It's building our future." I saw it all then, through the fog of my grief and my fierce, foolish love for my son. I saw a gleaming new bakery, Arthur's name in elegant chrome letters, a continuation of our life's work. I saw my son, successful and secure, finally fulfilling his potential. The brochure promised condos and retail, but what Barnaby was truly selling me was a dream I desperately wanted to believe in. A family, whole and thriving. The doubts, the small, cold whispers of caution in the back of my mind, were drowned out by the overwhelming desire to see that dream come true. The next day, I went to the bank. The wire transfer for $350,000, every penny I had saved over a lifetime of 4M mornings and aching backs, left my account. It felt less like a transaction and more like an act of faith. The first 3 months passed in a haze of hopeful anticipation. Barnaby would send sporadic, exciting updates. Permits approved, or groundbreaking next month. The promised first dividend payment came and went, excused by a text message citing minor administrative delays, standard stuff. The next 3 months, the silence grew louder. My calls to Barnaby started going to voicemail more often than not. When he did pick up, his voice was tight, strained. The excuses became vaguer, laced with jargon I didn't understand. Market fluctuations, Mom. The supply chain is a mess. We're just recalibrating the timeline. The dream began to fray at the edges. The glossy images from the brochure started to feel like a cruel joke. Then came the rainy Tuesday night. The doorbell rang long after dark, a jarring sound in the quiet house. It was Barnaby, but not the one I knew. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face pale and drawn, and the confident gleam in his eyes was replaced by a hunted look. He smelled faintly of whiskey. He collapsed into an armchair without being invited, running a hand through his usually perfect hair. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "It's gone, Mom," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "The project, it's dead. The primary investors pulled out. The whole thing's a bust." I felt the floor drop out from under me, a sickening lurch in my stomach. I gripped the armrest of my own chair, my knuckles white. "The money, Barnaby," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "My retirement, the $350,000. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the carpet, his jaw working. "That's gone too. It was used to cover preliminary costs to keep things afloat." He finally looked up, and his expression wasn't one of remorse, but of grim, impatient necessity. "Look, there's no time to get emotional. There's one way out of this. We sell the bakery." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" "The building," he said, his voice gaining a hard, dismissive edge. "The deed is the only real asset we have left that the creditors will accept to stave off a lawsuit. It's our only leverage." He saw the horror on my face and scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Oh, don't be so sentimental, Mom. It's just a building. It's bricks and mortar. Just a building." The words hung in the air between us, colder and sharper than any shard of glass. It wasn't just a building. It was my life. It was Arthur's legacy. It was the smell of my mornings, the flour under my fingernails, the place where my hands had created and my heart had resided for 40 years. In that single, brutal moment, I saw with perfect, devastating clarity that to my son, I was not a mother to be cherished, but an asset to be liquidated. The last thread of my trust, my love, my hope for him, didn't just fray. It snapped. For a full day, I was adrift in a sea of shock and grief. I wandered through my house, touching the furniture, the photographs, the familiar objects that suddenly felt like relics of a different life. The heartbreak was a physical ache in my chest. But as the second day dawned, something else began to crystallize from the pain, a cold, hard anger. It was an unfamiliar emotion for me, Beatrice Graham, the peacemaker, the quiet pillar of support. But it was there, and it was potent. I had not been a fool, I had been betrayed. My mind, clouded for so long by maternal affection, cleared with a chilling focus. I thought of Mr. Davies. Alastair Davies was a widower and a long-time customer at the bakery. He'd been the manager of the local community bank for 30 years before his retirement and possessed a mind as sharp as a bread knife. He was a man of quiet integrity, who always insisted on paying for his Saturday morning croissant, even when I tried to give it to him on the house. Summoning a reserve of courage I didn't know I had, I called him. An hour later, I was sitting in his tidy, book-lined study, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. I laid out the whole story, my voice shaking at first, then steadying with the force of my newfound resolve. I pushed the glossy Oakwood Terrace brochure and the flimsy investment agreement Barnaby had me sign across his desk. Mr. Davies put on his reading glasses and studied the documents in silence. He didn't rush. He read every line, his expression growing progressively grimmer. The silence stretched, thick with my anxiety. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at me, his eyes full of a sad, compassionate clarity. "B," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "This is worse than a bad investment. This document," he tapped the agreement with his finger, "is predatory. The guaranteed return of 20% with no mention of risk, the vague and unenforceable clauses, this was designed to deceive." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "From a legal standpoint, this is a textbook case of elder financial abuse. It's fraud. Fraud. The word landed like a punch. It was a legal term, cold and impersonal, but it validated everything I was feeling. It wasn't my fault. I wasn't a silly old woman who'd been duped. I was a victim of a calculated, cruel deception. Mr. Davies' words were the external confirmation I needed. They transformed my shapeless anger into a tangible weapon and extinguished the last, lingering ember of hope that this was all a terrible mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. And I was the target. In that quiet study, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and lemon polish, a shift occurred within me. The heartbroken mother receded, and in her place stood a woman I barely recognized, a woman with a mission. With Mr. Davies as my guide, I began my own quiet investigation. The work was methodical, precise, and it channeled my grief into a laser-like focus. "The first rule of finance, B, is that money always leaves a trail," Alastair told me, his voice calm and reassuring. He showed me how to access public records online, something I'd never imagined doing. We sat side by side at his large oak desk, and he patiently walked me through county clerk websites and business registration portals. The story that unfolded was uglier than I could have imagined. Oakwood Terrace wasn't just a failed project. It was a phantom from the start. It was buried under a mountain of debt and liens before I ever signed my check. My $350,000 hadn't gone into construction materials or permit fees. Alastair, using his old banking connections to discreetly inquire about certain transaction patterns, helped me piece together the truth. The money had been siphoned off almost immediately. We found records of a luxury car purchase in Barnaby's name, payments to a high-end condominium rental in the city, and several large transfers to accounts that Alastair identified as belonging to notorious private lenders, loan sharks. He hadn't just been trying to build a business. He'd been trying to pay his way out of a hole by digging me a grave. The most damning discovery came from a contact Alastair had at the city planning office. We found 3 other honorary directors listed on early project filings. A few phone calls confirmed our suspicions. 2 widows and a retired schoolteacher, all in their 70s and 80s, all convinced by Barnaby to invest their life savings into his fantasy of glass and steel. He had a pattern. He preyed on the lonely, the trusting, the people of my generation. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Alastair got a tip. "Barnaby's holding a meeting for his remaining creditors," he informed me one afternoon. "Next Wednesday, 2 p.m. at the Crestview Motel conference room. He's going to try and sell them another fantasy to buy himself more time." Alastair looked at me. "This is our chance, B. This is the stage." I felt a tremor of fear, but it was quickly overshadowed by a cold, steady resolve. I spent the next few days not baking, but preparing. I printed bank statements, property records, and copies of the other victims' nearly identical agreements. Each piece of paper was a brick in the wall I was building around myself, a testament to the truth. I was no longer just a baker. I was an archivist of my son's deceit. The conference room at the Crestview Motel smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The air was thick with the low, angry hum of about a dozen people. Contractors with unpaid invoices, small-time investors with worried faces, and a few men in sharp suits who looked far more dangerous than the others. Alastair and I took 2 chairs at the back, our presence going largely unnoticed in the tense atmosphere. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands, resting on the thick manila envelope in my lap, were perfectly steady. Barnaby stood at a podium at the front of the room, looking haggard but trying to project an air of beleaguered competence. He launched into a performance worthy of the stage. He spoke of an unprecedented economic winter, of supply chain betrayals, and of his tireless, round-the-clock efforts to right the ship. He was a victim, just like them. When he saw me and Alistair, his eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of irritation crossing his features before he smoothed it over. He concluded with a flourish, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. All I'm asking for is a little more time, a little more faith. I'm asking you to give the Graham family one more chance to make this right. The room was silent, heavy with skepticism. This was my moment. I pushed my chair back, the scraping sound unnaturally loud. I stood up. Barnaby. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the stale air like a blade. Every head turned towards me. My son stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. When you speak of the Graham family, I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word, are you referring to the mother whose entire retirement you stole with false promises? Or are you referring to the bakery, the one named for my husband, that you tried to leverage for a loan without my knowledge? A murmur went through the crowd. I walked slowly to the front of the room, Alistair right behind me. He connected a small laptop to the projector Barnaby had been using. The first image that flashed onto the screen was a copy of my wire transfer for $350,000. This was my life savings, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. Then Alistair clicked to the next slide. A bank statement showing a $70,000 payment to a luxury car dealership just 2 days later. Click, a record of the high-interest loan Barnaby had taken out, listing the bakery property as collateral with a forged signature of authorization. Click, the names and investment amounts of the 3 other elderly women he had defrauded. With each piece of evidence, a wave of shock and then fury rippled through the room. The narrative shattered. Barnaby was not a fellow victim. He was the architect of their losses. His face had gone from pale to ashen. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he stared at the undeniable proof of his lies projected for all to see. The angry hum in the room was no longer directed at the whims of the market. It was a low growl, and it was aimed squarely at my son. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was exposed, utterly and completely, not by a hostile creditor, but by the quiet, unassuming mother he had tried to erase. The meeting descended into chaos, but it was a righteous chaos. The anger in the room, once a formless cloud of anxiety, now had a clear target. Shouts erupted. One of the contractors, a burly man with paint-splattered jeans, jabbed a finger at Barnaby. You told me your mother was your primary backer. You used her good name. Someone in the back was already on the phone, his voice sharp and loud as he said the word police. The illusion Barnaby had so carefully constructed was incinerated in the harsh light of the truth. Within the hour, 2 police officers arrived. The Crestview Motel conference room became an impromptu interview space. Alistair, calm and methodical, presented the neatly organized file to the officers, explaining the timeline and the clear evidence of a pattern of fraudulent activity. I gave my statement, my voice no longer trembling. It was a simple recitation of facts. Barnaby, slumped in a chair, silent and defeated, was eventually escorted out. The image of my son being led to a police car is one that will never leave me. A mixture of profound sorrow and grim, necessary justice. The subsequent legal battle was a slow, grinding process. Barnaby was charged with multiple counts of fraud and financial elder abuse. My $350,000 was gone, swallowed by his debts and deceit, with no hope of recovery. The bakery, however, was safe. The forged loan document was thrown out, the lien declared invalid. I still own my building, my sanctuary. But an even more remarkable thing happened. Our local paper, the *Oak Haven Chronicle, picked up the story. They didn't portray me as a victim, but as a quiet woman who had fought back. The article sparked something in our community. Suddenly, Graham's Grains became more than just a bakery. It became a symbol. People I hadn't seen in years stopped by, not just to buy bread, but to offer a handshake, a hug, a word of support. They started a fundraising campaign online, calling it Save the Grains. Donations poured in $5, $20, $100 from a local business. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to pay the property taxes I'd worried about and to give the front of the shop a fresh coat of paint. It was a wave of community kindness that washed away the stain of Barnaby's betrayal. He called me once, after he'd been released on bail. His voice was thick with a syrupy, self-pitying remorse. He spoke of his shame, of his love for me, of how he could make it all up to me if I would just help him with his legal fees. It was the same manipulative tone, the same emotional puppetry. I listened patiently, without interruption. When he was finished, I said nothing. I simply pressed the end call button on my phone and then blocked his number. The line went dead, and with it, a lifetime of toxic obligation. Months have passed. Graham's Grains is more alive than ever, the bell above the door a constant, cheerful jingle. I didn't fully retire. Instead, I returned, not to the shadows behind the ovens, but to the heart of the bakery. I've started a small, free workshop on Saturday mornings, teaching young people from the neighborhood the art of baking. This morning, I'm sitting at my favorite small table by the window, a cup of coffee warming my hands. I watch the morning sun stream through the clean glass, illuminating the dancing dust motes of flour in the air. There is no bitterness in my heart, no lingering taste for vengeance. There is only this, a profound, quiet peace, a freedom I never knew I was missing. I have reclaimed my life, my craft, my dignity. I am home. Thank you all for listening to Bee's story. It takes immense courage to reclaim your life and set boundaries, especially with those closest to us. If you've ever faced a similar struggle, please know you're not alone, and we encourage you to share your own experiences in the comments below. Your story matters.